Our first reading today is from Genesis chapter 1, which you can find on page 2 of your Bibles. That's Genesis chapter 1, starting at verse 24. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
Our second reading is from John chapter 2, which is on page 1069 of the Church Bibles. So that's page 1069, John chapter 2, starting at verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory. and his disciples believed in him.
Now, over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be considering a subject about which all of us love to speak, and the question is one of the great questions of the early part of the 21st century. The issue we're going to be thinking about lies at the foundation of the way any culture thinks about, organizes, and governs itself. And the implications penetrate right through to the way we as individuals see ourselves and our sense of individual security and stability and personal worth in this world. It matters on the macro scale. It matters intensely on the micro scale. We're going to be talking over these few weeks about ourselves. And the question I want us to consider is, who am I? Who are we? This week, I've given us the title, I Am Brilliant, and this has led to some concern because our website only advertises the title of each individual sermon, followed by the speaker. So you may have noticed that it has read, I Am Brilliant, William Taylor. Well, let me assure you, next week it's I Am Rubbish, William Taylor. So I've already given some hints as to why this series matters, but one of the driving ideologies of our current age is that of identity. We should define ourselves, each of us, according to our own personal sense of who we are. So I'm straight, I'm gay, I'm a person of color, I'm female, I'm male, I'm privileged, I'm not. And identity politics, in its kind of grand vision, is seeking to construct an ideology, or if you like, a big story, a big meta-narrative that holds society together. But I want to suggest that this way of defining ourselves by who we are individually, our identity, simply cannot bear the weight of a whole culture. You may have come across the philosopher and social commentator Douglas Murray. He's written this very interesting book, The Madness of Crowds. He himself, though he wouldn't define himself this way, is from a homosexual background. And this book is also summarized in a fascinating interview with John Anderson. If you Google Douglas Murray, John Anderson, you'll be able to get the book in 45 minutes in that interview. And Murray talks about what he calls load-bearing walls. And he says this new way, this new meta-narrative, trying to hold itself as a way of operating as a culture, simply cannot bear the weight of what it's seeking to carry. But and you will have, if you've seen the Lawrence Fox Newsnight piece on the internet or anything like that, or read about it, you can see some of the problems when one person of one identity and another person of another identity conflict. It's not simply at the level of a culture, also at the level of an individual. Who am I? It's absolutely foundational. If I don't know who I am, where I've come from, where I'm going, what I'm doing here, then I'm always going to be, if you like a kind of cork bobbing on the waves, not certain, possible to be blown this way and that way, insecure, uncertain. And then much, much, much more important, if there actually is a God, and I don't know why I'm here and what I'm doing here, and I don't actually know him, then I won't be able to make sense of what it means to be truly human. And I'll be kind of living out of my given context all the time, uncomfortable, diseased, if you like. So it's a really important series. It's great to see lots of people here. There's plenty of room for at least another 200, and I would encourage you to bring friends as next week we think about I Am Rubbish. But don't miss a week as we follow through this series. First, I am created and connected. The outline is there on the notice sheet. Now, I'm not going to go into great length in defense of God as creator. You can see verse 27, which is our key verse tonight on page 2. So God created man. And verse 26, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Suffice it to say that whatever way we read the text of Genesis 1, the fundamental point of the author is that God created. Read the text, you'll find it's almost monotonous in its repetition. God said, God called, God saw, it was so, it was good. God said, God called, God saw, it was so, it was good. It just goes on and on through the 6 days. Now, I am personally not convinced that the text itself calls us to be 6-day creationists, that is, to believe that God created the world in 6 24-hour periods. What the text does demand is that we see that there is a creator. And the writing of Genesis 1 is extraordinarily sophisticated. Just spend an evening this week reading it and studying it. Given that it's so sophisticated, the author is self-evidently not so stupid as to realize that on day 1, God created the light, but on day 4, God created the sun and the moon. So to suggest, oh, well, it's contradictory is to fail to see how sophisticated the author is and not to have worked hard enough at the text. More careful study of Genesis 1 shows that in the first 3 days, God forms the earth, and in the second 3 days, God fills the earth. And I think that's the point that the author is seeking to make, not so much something about 6 24-hour periods, but rather that it's God who made it. He formed it, he filled it. It's all his. There is a creator. But of course, if there is a creator, then we are special. I don't mean we're special. In that sense, we are really special, really precious. You may have come across the former professor of cosmology at Cambridge University, Professor Stephen Hawking. Here is his view, quote, "The human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one of among 100 billion galaxies." Well, no, not if we're created. Indeed, Stephen Hawking's successor in the chair of cosmology in Cambridge University is Professor Paul Shellard. And Paul Shellard, who is Professor of Cosmology and Director of the Stephen Hawking Institute, is a convinced, keen, and evangelical Christian, a Bible-believing Christian, who believes that our universe was created, having studied the evidence. For me, I go to Jesus. And you look at the account of Jesus in the Gospels, and you can see the Creator walking his world. And in the life of Jesus, we can see evidence backing up the statement and the facts of Genesis chapter 1, that there is a creator. And I would say there is a creator, his name is Jesus. He turns water into wine. He walks on water. He orders the elements as if they were just a small puppy. In fact, rather better than if they were a small puppy. If we were created, then we are connected. And the first sentence of our text stresses this, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." And it's also there in our key verse, 27. God created man in his own image. In other words, our Maker is not wholly other. We can understand and know him. There is something about us that is able to conceive of God and be connected to God because we are in the image of God. He's not in creation completely divorced from us. He made us in his image. And the Apostle Paul makes this point. God made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place, so that they should seek after God. Thus, as we've already suggested, we are not simply random beings, as Stephen Hawking intimates. We are not just chemical scum. We are created. We have an origin. We are special. Jacques Monod, French science philosopher from the 1970s, from whom Richard Dawkins, I think, got most of his ideas, wrote this book, Chance and Necessity. I shall quote to you in English. I've got it here in English, actually, so I'm going to quote you in French for a second. Listen to this. No, I won't try a French accent. Man must at last wake to his total solitude, his fundamental isolation. Does he at last realize that, like a gypsy, he lives on the boundary of an alien world, a world that is deaf to his music, just as indifferent to his hopes as it is to his sufferings and his crimes. Man knows at last that he is alone in the universe's unfeeling immensity out of which he emerged only by chance. Now that is the proper logical conclusion of the secularist. Here's a man with the courage of his convictions. If there is no creator, you've emerged by chance. You are alone. A number of years ago, we were staying in a house that has an upstairs kitchen and downstairs bedrooms. It's an upside-down house. And I was in the kitchen doing something or other, sort of kitchen sort of stuff, and I heard loud sobbing coming from the bedroom downstairs. And I went downstairs, and my wife was there, and she was sobbing so loudly that I could hear her upstairs. She'd just finished this book by Sebastian Fuchs. And Charlotte Gray, I'm going to ruin the plot for you here, but in Charlotte Gray, he charts two separate groups of individuals. They're two twins, sort of 8, 10, 12-year-old Jewish boys. And there are two lovers. And the twins cross the threshold into the gas chamber, and the lovers cross the threshold into the church. And he describes it in exactly the same way. There was another room, another door, with bolts and rubber seals, over whose threshold the two boys, among many others, went through icy air and disappeared. And then the lovers, they crossed into the cold interior of the church, heavy with the scent of cut flowers, the murmuring of the organ into the soft air, and disappeared. Get his point? If you're a secularist, we're only here by chance. We're random specks in the universe. When you're gone, who cares? You've disappeared. The careful reader will spot that in the middle of the book, there's a professor who explains the philosophy. No child born knows the world he is entering, and at the moment of his birth, he is a stranger to his parents. When he dies, many years later, there may be regrets among those left behind that they never knew him, but he is forgotten almost as soon as he dies because there is no time for others to puzzle out his life. After a few years, he'll be referred to once or twice by a grandchild, then by no one at all, unknown at the moment of birth, unknown after death, this weight of solitude, a being unknown. And yet, if I believe in God, I am known. At the hour of my death, I wish to be known unto God. The famous church figure Augustine, thou hast made us for thyself, and we are restless until we find our rest in thee. You're somebody, created, connected. It's beautiful. You matter. And the second observation from our text pushes that a little bit further. You could almost fold it into the first, but we are unique and distinctive. That is, we are unique in creation. That is, we're not the same as the animals. Now, did you notice that the reading from verse 24, all of it describes the sixth day? The sixth day is distinct from the third and fourth day where plant life is described. We are not plant life. I hope you've realized that. But nor are we simply animal life. We share the sixth day. So verse 24 and 25 describe the creation of the animals, and so we share the day. And we share the same day. We're of the same stuff. We have many of the same organs, our physiology, some of our instincts. They are the same as the animals, some more than others. No, sorry, that was gratuitous. But we are unique and distinct from the animals. We're different. So look at verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. And look at verse 26. Let us make man in our image after our likeness. That is not said of the animals. Animals are not made in the image of God. Animals are not connected to God. They don't seek after God. Animals do not have consciences, nor are they given dominion. Animals are not answerable to God. And it is entirely wrong to suggest that we are in any way the same as animals in that sense. So the ethicist, that is the moral thinker Peter Singer, famous atheist, in his book practical ethics, and then the LSE professor of European thought, John Gray, both argue that humans and animals are essentially of the same stuff and therefore should have equal rights. They fail to notice what is self-evident to a normal person with any common sense, and they fail to notice what God has shown us in verse 24, 25, 26 to the end. Listen to Peter Singer. Those who protest against abortion but dine regularly on the bodies of chickens, pigs, and calves show only a biased concern for the lives of members of their own species. For any fair comparison of morally relevant characteristics like rationality, self-consciousness, awareness, autonomy, pleasure, and pain, the calf, the pig, the much derided chicken come out well ahead of the fetus at any stage of pregnancy. In fact, he says, if we make the comparison with a fetus of less than 3 months, a fish would show more signs of consciousness, and therefore, he says, terminate at will. Indeed, the infant up to the age of 3 to 6 months shows less consciousness than a horse, and therefore terminate at will. And the elderly terminate at will. Except when it comes to his mum. I had read Peter Singer a number of years ago when this came out, and happened to hear him being interviewed on the radio one Saturday morning. So I pulled the car over and got my notebook out. I did do both of those things, and started taking notes. And listen to what he said when challenged as to why he was keeping his mother in a home, because he teaches euthanasia utilitarian-wise. He said this: it's different when it's your mum. What an idiot. Some of you will have seen the BBC series, 7 Worlds, One David Attenborough, no, 7 Worlds, One Planet. And you remember the scene as the cameras pan in on one of the older chimps. She has mastered the ability to crack a nut by placing the nut on a rock, holding a stone and bringing the stone down on the nut. And in hushed whispers, Attenborough describes the development required to complete so accomplished an act of sophisticated culinary skill. Here we have the indications of some Stone Age past, as if there were some uninterrupted line and really we're all of the same stuff. Well, let me say, having witnessed some teenage members of St. Helens eating in my house over the last 25 years, I have occasionally wondered whether he has a point. But, it's profoundly wrong, isn't it? You watch that Attenborough scheme and then turn to MasterChef, and we're of a completely different order. Look at the brilliance, look at the sophistication, look at the creative genius of humanity in the arts, in the sciences, in literature and music and painting and architecture, in digital accomplishments, in medical advance, in financial modeling, in corporate endeavor and individual achievement. Go to the Stone Age, the Neolithic Age, and look at Stonehenge. Take a walk around the present age, the city, and look at what we've accomplished. Just walk out of the building, open your eyes, and have a look at some of these buildings. Visit St. Paul's, the early modern age. Humanity is brilliant, distinct from the animals. But we are also distinctive from one another. And this is where we need to look at our text again for a bit of basic common sense that should be obvious to anyone with a modicum of scientific ability. Verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Look closely at the verse for a moment and notice the him, which refers to humanity as a whole, and the male and female, which refers to the two sexes. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. In other words, there is one humanity, there are two sexes, one human race, two genders. And the point here is that humanity as a whole is constituted not simply by male alone. God's image on earth is represented by male and female together, but it is entirely binary. I want to underscore Mickey's advertisement for this Sharon James book. Actually, if you get it here for £6, you'll be able to get it today. You won't have to wait till tomorrow, which you would have to do if you were with Amazon. So you really can get it today. She shows us reality that from birth, a person is genetically either of the male sex or of the female sex. Go and ask any of the medics over there. One of the medics, qualified doctor, GP, said to me afterwards, I was listening to this bit of the talk very, very carefully, good, and I was trying to think, is that right? And he said, damn it, it is right. I know it's right. It's genetically right. So, from Sharon James, it is impossible to change sex. You can only change appearance. Our birth sex cannot be changed. No amount of surgery can change a man into a woman or a woman into a man. The XX female or XY male chromosomal pattern is set at conception. These chromosomes are found in nearly every cell of the body. A DNA test will always reveal who you truly are. Nothing can change our fundamental genetic makeup. Surgeons can construct artificial genitalia, but these artificial genitalia have no reproductive capacity. Notice that these two sexes then, male and female, because together they make up humanity in the image of God, are of equal value. All humanity is of equal value. Of course, we can't all be absolutely equal in every respect. That is the pipe dream of the utopian. It's a foolish idea to suggest that we should all be equal in everything. We're not of equal height, we're not of equal strength, we're not of equal intelligence or sporting ability or musical gifting or mathematical capacity. So we cannot be equal in everything. But every human being is valued as a created being in the image of God. There is a fundamental preciousness to humanity. Every human bears God's mark. Every human created by God, every human in God's image. And of course that rules out any form of abuse, mistreatment, discrimination. It's the foundation block for all the human rights movements. That's where they begin, back here in Genesis 1. You won't find it in other cultures where there hasn't been a rooting in Genesis. It comes from here. You won't meet anybody tomorrow who isn't deeply precious. Isn't that challenging? I was walking across the Millennium Bridge and just reminding myself as a mass of humanity came towards me and jostled with me, every single one in the image of God. I am created and connected. We are unique and distinctive. Responsible and accountable. Responsible. So God gives to humanity the task of fruitful multiplication and the responsibility of dominion. And you can see that both in verse 26. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heaven, over the livestock and all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And in verse 28, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. Now, this absolutely does not create a license for abuse of the environment or of the animals and other creatures. Indeed, there is a Christian way to care for what God has entrusted to us. It's not ours to trample all over or to squander. It's been given to us on trust. And we are to have dominion as image bearers of God. We are to manage and nurture the resources of this planet. It places a check, doesn't it, on rampant materialism. I'll just go and pillage the earth. I'll tear down rainforests and I'll plunder the seas. But the meaning of in his image in creation is given further content by this phrase, have dominion. You know, to be an image bearer is to be an image bearer of the Creator. Hence, have dominion. And so as humanity multiplies out into the world, so as humanity multiplies out, we are to be his image bearer in each place we find ourselves. We're precious, we're valued, we're unique, we're distinctive, we're connected to the King of Kings. And we are, if you like, mini vice regents, every one of us, wherever we go, princes and princesses as image bearers, carrying the image of God out to the ends of the earth. It's a beautiful picture, isn't it? You see, don't you, in dictatorships and so forth, that whoever the ruler is likes to have their image stamped absolutely everywhere. Okay, take you to Eastern Europe, you'll find in Riga or any one of Lithuania or any one of those places, you'll find that there'll be great statues to Lenin and Stalin. Iraq, in the days of Saddam Hussein, great pictures of, even we, actually, if you take a coin out of your pocket, even we have it, don't we? The Queen's head. And everywhere we go, we are to see ourselves as an image bearer, dominion, ruling as a vice regent. This places on each one of us a very deep sense of responsibility. You know, my dad was a very real Christian, but his faith was very private and it would just come out in various ways. You know, he wasn't somebody who talked a lot about his faith, largely because he hadn't been properly taught in the church that was led by. Anyway, let's not go into that. But he didn't speak openly about it, but just lived it really clearly. And I remember one time coming back from a nearby farm and telling him how on that farm they were looking after one particular animal. And he said, "That's not very Christian, is it? Isn't that striking? There's a Christian way to farm if you're an image bearer." Not simply responsibility, but also accountability. And I think that comes through strongly. It was given to us. And there is this sense, isn't there, of real accountability, that it's here on trust. We've been lent it, if you like. And so we are to exercise our dominion before the King of Kings. Well, now, throughout the series, there are going to be a number of observations. There's the basic content, okay? Created and connected, unique and distinctive, responsible and accountable. What I'm going to do for the next few minutes now is just throw out some observations to you, which I hope might be helpful and will form a basis of discussion through the rest of the week, the rest of the evening, and so forth. That's why I want to encourage you to be here so that you can engage in some of the discussion that flows out of these talks Sunday by Sunday, over at after eights or whatever it happens to be. There are many other observations that you could make. Here are just some that struck me. Significance and belonging. I am not an atomized, autonomous individual. I am not an atomized, autonomous individual. You may have noticed one of our country's most famous modern philosophers died this week, Roger Scruton. He wasn't everybody's cup of tea. In fact, he got non-platformed in one after another university. But across the spectrum, he was acknowledged as among the top leading thinkers of the late 20th century. Listen to what he has to say, one famous quote of his. "We are needy creatures, and our greatest need is for home." Where do we belong? Who do we belong to? What is home? Genesis 1 tells us that home is to be connected to God. Now, if you're here as somebody investigating the Christian faith, and may I say, we are absolutely thrilled. I'm personally really glad you're here. If you're just looking into the Christian faith, I hope you'll come through the whole series and get a proper Christian begin to put together a Christian worldview. I hope you will really enjoy it and come and talk to me and tell me how you're finding it. I'd love that. But isn't that wonderful? Actually, the place where we find ourselves to be truly human is in relationship to the one who made us. That's home. If you're already a Christian, then what a wonderful thing to be able to say to yourself. You know, as you go home this evening, as you look in the mirror, as no doubt you will do either tonight or tomorrow morning at some point, you can look at yourself, you know, I actually belong to a creator. I have come home. I am of extraordinary significance, No matter what others might say of me today, whatever people might suggest online about me, whatever my past, whatever my future, whether I meet the standards of acceptance of our culture or whether I match up to what my parents hoped of me, whether our family have made it, whether I make it, I am home with my Creator. What a security that gives to you. What is man that you are mindful of him? Second area, just to consider, and there's so much you could do thinking around that. Second area to think about is what I've called on the sheet there equality, but I think for reasons I've just suggested, I'd prefer to call dignity. The idea of equality opens up too many silly misunderstandings of the idea that we should all be equal, which is a stupid idea. We can't all be equal. Okay, so let's think about dignity. You know, a number of people have known that we're doing this series, and one was Ranti Williams, who was leading the prayers so excellently earlier. And she breezed up to me a little bit before Christmas and gave me this chapter. I'm not sure if she's broken photocopying rules, actually, but there we are. Luc Ferry is French. He used to be the Minister for Education, didn't he, I think, Luc Ferry? Anyway, there we go. Another piece of French literature. It is quite clear that without this Christian re-evaluation of the human person, of the individual as such, the philosophy of human rights to which we subscribe today would never have established itself. He's talking about the victory of Christianity over Greek culture. And of course, Greek culture, as he goes on to say, the Greek world was fundamentally an aristocratic world, a universe organized as a hierarchy in which those who most endowed by nature should in principle be at the top, while the less endowed saw themselves occupying inferior ranks. That got me thinking. We live in a very Greek-shaped type world with the idea of meritocracy. Meritocracy rewards those who have merit. And if you have merit in the sporting world or the academic world, you're rewarded. Immediately you have a hierarchy and a new aristocracy, a new entitled elite. And anybody who's not well endowed academically or part of the sporting celebrity elite, you're somehow inferior. And don't we see that written all over the 21st century? And so those of us who've been brought up in a meritocracy, which is just about all of us, need to learn that if we're all created in the image of God, there is equal dignity whether you're shelf stacker or the CEO, whether you're refuse collector or the professor in the university, whether you're a manual laborer in Bangladesh or a boardroom managing director in EC3, all of equal dignity. That's an interesting area to think about, isn't it? Morality. Of course, if there is a God and if we're responsible to him and accountable to him, then he is the one who provides us with a barometer of what is right and what is wrong. Isn't that wonderful? But you see, without God, we're left to decide for ourselves. You decide what you think's right. I decide what I think's right. Somebody else over here decides what they think's right. That's all well and dandy. But if we disagree with one another and one of us begins to exercise a position of power, i.e. the identity warriors of our age, they will start to decide what's right. And ultimately, might will be right. Might is right. Was that Dostoevsky? If God is dead, might is right. Somebody come and tell me who the quote's from. But ultimately, see, if there is no God who is good, creator, then you end up in constant friction. A fourth area, and then we'll be done. Sexuality. These verses are really important when it comes to sexuality and particularly to the physical act of sexual intercourse. Here we are in Genesis 1. I know what we're going to say here will be controversial. I hope it's not too painful for us. I always want to say when I'm talking on this kind of subject that every single one of us is a failure in this area of sexuality. And I'm speaking as somebody who's a failure to a group of failures. But there are only two sexes. And the two sexes brought together in marriage in chapter 2 are to go forth and multiply in chapter 1. They are to fill the earth. And this is only possible through sexual intercourse. And sexual intercourse is, by design, therefore, created at least for reproduction. Thus, by design, certain things about sexual intercourse are natural, and certain things about sexual intercourse are not natural. In a moment, I'm going to list some of those unnatural things. But before I do so, let me say, I realize that in a culture where people have abandoned any sense of a creator, then people will not believe that design has anything to do with it. Of course not. To them, what seems natural will be whatever I feel is right or whatever I'm attracted to. But we're going to discover next week that as humans, what we feel is right and what we're attracted to is not necessarily right. May I also say that simply by biological and physiological observation, what God has prescribed as natural is self-evident. So if there are just two sexes, and the purpose of the sexes coming together is reproduction, then anal penetration is not natural. It's not only not natural, and it cannot be experienced pleasurably without external aid, it is also dangerous, opening up the possibility of disease, which in some countries is life-threatening. Anal sex, in that sense, is not natural. The penis was not created by God to penetrate the anus. Talk to a doctor about that, they will confirm it. Two people without testicles cannot naturally conceive children. It's a biological impossibility. Same-sex sex in that sense is not natural. It's not part of God's design. And two people without a womb cannot give birth naturally. I mean, you know that. It's plain as a pikestaff. I mean, I come from an agricultural background, so obviously we understand these things. Maybe in London people don't understand these things. But it's plain as a pikestaff with anyone, even less than a GCSE in biology, that all those three things are true. Well, there are some observations. As a culture drifts from its moorings, that culture continues to function for a period on the credit of what it once was. But that credit cannot continue indefinitely. Gradually, a generation dies out, and then 2 generations. The culture drifts from its moorings, and it drifts, and eventually it's all at sea. And this series is designed to equip us so that we are not like corks bobbing in the middle of the ocean, blown this way and that, at the whim of whatever crazy idea comes our way, which is so self-evidently nonsense once you begin to look at things clearly. But it's also designed to help us as we interact with our friends who are all at sea in the 21st century, and to help them find safe harbor. I hope you find it a real help and a deep encouragement. Allow me to lead us in prayer. Your word is a light to my path and a lamp. Our Father, we praise you for your living word, that it breathes life and common sense and beauty and reality. It so matches and is so true. And we pray that you would strengthen our grasp on reality. Help us to be those who delight in your truth and in you, and having come home to you. And please send us out now to worship you, to praise you in the office tomorrow morning, in the halls of residence, in our lecture halls. Across London, may we be those whose worship is full of talk of you and of your goodness. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.